Hello, I am drinking my coffee and I'm going to go over Season 4, Episode 1 of Stranger Things for you, talking about thematic ideas and some of the philosophy things that might help enrich. So, fair warning, we're going to be talking about Season 4, Episode 1. We're not going to be talking about the other episodes, but there is a general working idea that you know what happened before. I am probably going to be proved wrong on some of these things, but I find that this is sometimes fun. By the way, if you like this content and you think that it is enjoyable, please recommend my website to other people, because that's how I make my money. Okay, so before we actually get into episode 1, there's a couple of things that I wanted to talk to you about. Maybe enrich your viewing, maybe not. But the first thing is that you'll notice that I'm filming outside, and I'm actually doing that for a reason. We're going to talk about during this episode the idea of solipsism and the fragmentation of identity that has started to exist because of the internet. And remember, when we're looking at this time period, this is sort of the beginning of technology being another aspect of identity. And we see this in the projection through the D&D game, which I'll talk about in a minute. But what you may have noticed as far as genres go recently is the fact that there's a whole bunch of TV shows talking about people either going crazy and then figuring out that the craziness is actually reality, or that there's this whole other realm that exists and there's like multiverses and all of those things. Well, there's a sociological theory that's associated with that, and it has to do with the idea that we are creating a reality that's a little bit easier to stomach for ourselves, and even if that's not a real reality, it allows us to function in the reality that's not so nice. So, for example, right now I'm having a conversation with you, sort of, through my phone, and you're going to hear things in the background that are kind of distracting. Like, there's car noises, and there is bird sounds, and, like, my skin doesn't look that great because, like, I'm in natural lighting as opposed to, like, that nice, pretty ring lighting. And so reality in and of itself is kind of a harsh construct. And I know you're like, well, duh. But I want you to think about it this way. When you think back on your childhood, most likely you think about things in very extreme motions. So either that was a really, really bad thing that happened that was very traumatizing to you, or it was like the best moment ever. And so everything in your memory seems to be kind of like Technicolor. So when we're looking at series like Stranger Things, things aren't necessarily so much nostalgic as they are trying to bring that sort of like Technicolor aspect of memory back, even if that Technicolor aspect of memory isn't true. So we start Stranger Things with this mysterious person who gets the newspaper and in a timed fashion completes the crossword puzzle, and then goes and very carefully clips this bonsai tree. And what we are seeing here is the idea of sculpting your own reality. So the way that it's sort of explained to me, and the way that I understand it, is that the existential crisis too long, let me sum up. The existential crisis is the understanding that eventually we're going to die. Like, we're all going to die. Like, death is not this mysterious thing that like comes from your grandma, or comes for your grandma, and like comes for your pet fish, but not for you. Like, the moment that you understand that death is an actual real thing, there is a crisis that exists in our psyche in which we see, oh wait, I am going to eventually die. And that's when the other half of the understanding of what it means to be a human being on this earth comes along, and that is, how do I make sure that like I am not forgotten, right? And so that's the extension of the existential crisis, which is having children. So there is a theory in critical literature that basically says that the moment of understanding, knowledge, or epiphany for a child moving from childhood to adulthood is the true internalization of both death is real and I will die and I will no longer be on this earth and I will probably be forgotten in the grand scheme of things. Sex creates babies. Babies extend my life. So if I can create another little me on this earth, then that extends my life. So the existential crisis itself becomes manifested through our children. Well, what does that have to do with a bonsai tree? A lot of people argue that, and I have to be careful because I love my parents nowadays, like my current generation of parents, and I would argue that this particular argument has been used against parents for a very long time. Some people argue, sociologically speaking, that there is a movement towards curating children the way that we curate bonsai trees. So to show you this again, that we essentially grow this little tree because we want to create something that is living within our lives, but then we clip it in very precise ways and we contain it within a container, right? So while you may say to yourself, okay, but what does that have to do with Stranger Things? Remember, if we're talking about the idea of identity and how we place ourselves in this world, we don't just live in a world spatially speaking. We also live in a world as far as time. And that's what Stranger Things is actually exploring. It's not just space and it's not just magical realism. This is a story about time and how difficult time is for anyone to understand. So a bonsai tree is supposed to represent a tree that's hundreds of years old. And yet here it is on this tiny little planet being curated by someone with tiny little scissors in a tiny little pot. And it's supposed to represent the extension of time and the extension of identity. So next we're shown this room and there's a whole bunch of children and they're all playing around with telekinesis. So remember I told you that there's a difference between spatiality and temporality, right? So time and space. So what the Hawkins Institute is looking at is this would be like level 1. They're talking about, or they're exploring, or they're having the kids explore their ability to use telekinesis, right? So he's moving the ball through this particular maze, and that is space, okay? So that's within a space. But if we're of multiple dimensions, which is what the scientists at Stranger Things, the Institute, the Hawkins Institute, is actually exploring, multiple dimensions does not just mean space. That is like level 1. Level 2 would be the idea of time. Because if we're talking about a multiverse, if we're talking about multiple dimensions, that means that time has to be an aspect of that. Why is that important? The number one thing that philosophers and critical thinkers cannot think their way out of is time. Hume tried to do it. Descartes tried to do it. There is no way that our brains can live in a place without time, right? There's all sorts of experiments that talk about removing time, and what essentially happens is our sleep patterns get all messed up and like literally we kind of fry our own brains. So time becomes an essential part of our understanding what reality is, but in order for them to break on through to the other side, to get to this other dimension, they have to get these little kidlets to figure out, to take their telekinesis not only from this plane of time to a different plane of time. And that's what 11 and what we will. So why a magic 8 ball? Like, why didn't he have the kid like just say, well, yes, I am also. So there's actually 2 reasons why a magic 8 ball. 1, 80s nostalgia. And remember, if we're talking about what Stranger Things is trying to accomplish, at least what I think they're trying to accomplish, we have to look at the fact that this 80s nostalgia is a form of understanding space and time in that nostalgic technicolor kind of way, right? Just like the way that we understand ourselves and create our own identity is through a memory feed that is a very bright, powerful memory feed. That's how the 80s feel. Like the whole color palette of the 80s is very bright and powerful and technicolor, right? So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it has to do with what the magic 8 ball is supposed to do. The magic 8 ball is supposed to predict the future by allowing you to let go of the control of the spatiality of the present. I know that was a lot. So basically, you shake it up and you leave it up to the fates, whatever the fates are, right? Maybe the fates are God, maybe the fates are the universe, or maybe the fates are like actually you, right? But the magic 8 ball is supposed to predict the future, okay? And what is this little kiddo doing? He's manipulating the present by using a tool that's supposed to predict the future.